Hello and welcome to Accelerator. My name is Rob, and on this example, we're going to look at something that I ran into at work where I had a lot of formulas, and the formulas all had relative references. And what I was trying to do was copy all of that over to a different sheet. The problem being that when I did that, the relative references would change, and it would have been a real pain to sit there and go through one by one and change them from relative references to absolute references. To illustrate this point, here I've got an original formula, which is A2. So A2 is pointing to Apple. Now, if I copy that and I want it to still say Apple, but I paste it, it's going to change the reference because it's moved down 3 rows where I'm pasting it. So it's going to move down 3 rows of where it's pointing to. So instead of A2, it's now pointing at A5. Now, you can take care of that easily by selecting the range and hitting F4, and that'll cycle through the different reference styles. But like I said, in my particular case, I had a lot of formulas that I was dealing with, and it would have been a pain to go through one by one. So I wrote some Visual Basic code that would go through each cell, convert it from relative references to absolute references. That way I could copy the formulas without having to worry about the answers changing. So we're going to look at that code now. So I'm going to hit Alt F11, and that takes me here. And I've written the main code here as well as a function that will do the converting of the formulas. So in the main function, I declare my variables as two different ranges. A range is going to be what we make equal to the selection. For this example, it's just going to be one cell, but if we had multiple cells selected, it would cycle through each one of those cells and convert the formula reference. So now we're saying for each cell in the selection or A range, we're going to call our custom function, and that function is convert relative. Now I made this function and it has two arguments. One is the range that we're looking at, and two is whether it's going to be absolute or relative. And I made that a Boolean, so when you type in that argument, it's either going to be true or false. So if we look at that code, we're just looking at a basic if statement. If this argument is true, then we make it equal to 1. Now, if you were writing out the code in general, you'd say for this argument right here, you can see if we delete that and type in another comma, we're looking at the to absolute. And normally you could just put XL relative or XL absolute, and it would know what to do with that. But really, both of those are just shorthand for it to refer to integer numbers. And XL absolute is a 1 and XL relative is a 4. So it's just it's a lot easier to do it that way. So what it's going to do is it's going to look at the formula in our initial argument, which is the cell that is being passed over from this part of the code, and it's going to use this application function of converting the formula. It's going to ask for the first argument, which is the actual formula, the second argument, which is what reference style you're coming from, and the third is what reference style you're going to. Most everybody uses A1 reference. Some people do the R1, C1, but it's not something you see very often. And if that's what you use, that's fine. You can change those. But for, I would say, 95% of the people out there, at least, they just use A1 reference. So we're going to leave those in there. And then the response is up here. What we have is either relative or absolute. So if we go ahead and look, we're going to run the code now. And I'm just going to hit F5, and I'm going to change this argument here because we want it to be true. because true means that it's going to change it from relative to absolute. And if you look over here, you can see that it's relative, but once I hit F5, it changes it to an absolute reference. If I change it back to false and then run the code again, you'll see that it changes back to relative reference. And just for the sake of demonstration, we'll go back to absolute and show now if I copy this cell and paste it down here, it's going to keep Apple because it's a absolute reference. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. And as always, if you have any problems that you're dealing with a workbook that you're working on, put those questions in the comments too, and we'll possibly make a video answering your questions. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next episode.